There is one mistake that destroys powerful men faster than any scandal, any betrayal, or any public downfall. And that mistake is trying to defend yourself. The moment you start explaining, justifying, or proving your innocence, you've already lost control of the narrative. Because the truth is simple. In the game of power, perception is stronger than facts, and silence is more terrifying than defense. This is the lesson Niccolo Machiavelli left hidden between the lines of The Prince. Never waste your strength in defending your reputation. Let your silence and actions defend you, because every time you rush to justify yourself, you reveal something fatal. You show that you care about what they think, and the man who cares too much about his image becomes the puppet of those who can damage it. So today, you'll learn one of Machiavelli's most psychologically brutal tactics, the art of overturning power not by argument, not by defense, but by silent domination. Because the man who refuses to defend himself becomes untouchable. He turns accusations into fuel, and when you try to defend yourself, you trigger something invisible, but profoundly psychological. You place yourself beneath the person attacking you. The moment you begin to explain or justify, you unconsciously declare that the other person's perception of you carries weight. You hand them emotional authority. Think about it. When you react, you're not acting. You're being moved. And when you are being moved, you are no longer the one in control. This is the silent psychological transaction that weak men never notice. They think they are standing up for themselves, but in truth, they are bowing under pressure. Machiavelli warned centuries ago that he who controls appearances controls minds. The man who forces you to explain yourself has already won half the battle, because you have accepted his frame of the world. You are now playing his game. Defensiveness is not power. It is emotional surrender disguised as strength. The instant you try to prove your worth, you're admitting it's in question. Only a man who doubts himself tries to convince others. The man who knows his value never argues it. He radiates it. The moment you begin defending yourself, you unconsciously communicate that you need external validation to stabilize your inner reality. You become dependent on others' opinions for psychological security. This dependency is fatal in the realm of power because it gives anyone with the courage to question you the ability to destabilize you. That's why truly powerful men, the emperors, strategists, and Machiavellian thinkers throughout history, mastered the art of indifference. They understood that silence can be more terrifying than any argument. When accused, they didn't rush to deny. When insulted, they didn't rush to react. Because silence, when used strategically, becomes a weapon of psychological pressure. It unsettles, it confuses, it forces the attacker to face their own uncertainty. You see, when you stay silent, the other person begins to project their own fears into that silence. They start asking themselves dangerous questions. Did I misjudge him? Is he confident or hiding something? Is he too powerful to care, or too dangerous to provoke further? And while they drown in their own doubt, you remain composed, untouched, unreadable, in control. This is the essence of psychological warfare. Never fight on the terms your opponent sets for you. When you defend, you fight from weakness. When you stay still, you force them to question their attack. Power is not in your words, it's in your composure. The man who does not explain himself becomes a mystery. And in a world ruled by appearances and uncertainty, mystery is more commanding than truth. Machiavelli once wrote, "Men in general judge more by the eye than by the hand." In other words, people don't care about your intentions. They care about what they can see. They believe appearances over explanations, confidence over reasoning, dominance over words. This is why the true strategist never wastes energy trying to justify his actions or convince others of his truth. He doesn't explain. He shapes perception. He doesn't defend. He defines. Power, in its purest form, is not about being right. It's about controlling how reality appears to others. That is the essence of frame control. When someone attacks you, whether through accusation, sarcasm, or social pressure, their real objective isn't to hurt you, but to drag you into their frame. Their frame dictates the terms of power. It says, "You are on trial, now prove your innocence." Or, "You are weak, now prove your strength." The instant you accept this unspoken premise, you validate it. You begin to fight inside the world they created, not yours. You've entered their psychological battlefield, and now every word you say becomes ammunition against you. This is how people lose power without realizing it, not through defeat, but through reaction. The Machiavellian man, however, never fights on foreign ground. He doesn't argue, doesn't justify, doesn't flinch. He flips the dynamic by doing something deceptively simple. He ignores the frame entirely. His tone stays calm, his posture remains unmoved, his gaze unshaken. He gives nothing. No defense, no explanation, no emotional response. This unnerves the attacker because it violates their expectations. They wanted drama, but they received silence. They wanted control, but met indifference. And in that silent void, their certainty begins to fracture. They start to question themselves, to wonder if they misjudged you, or if perhaps you hold some unseen advantage. That subtle discomfort, that psychological confusion, is the first step in restoring your dominance. This is why some of history's most formidable minds, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, and the most cunning modern CEOs, mastered this art of non-defensive dominance. They understood that power isn't displayed through argument, it's projected through composure. People are not persuaded by your words, they are hypnotized by your emotional stability. When you remain unaffected, the message is clear. You cannot reach me. And nothing is more intimidating than a person who cannot be emotionally reached. So remember this immutable psychological law. The man who argues looks insecure. The man who stays calm looks powerful. And the man who smiles in silence looks dangerous. Because in that silence, everyone else starts to wonder what you know and what you might do next. That is frame control in its purest form. Not by dominating others through words, but by controlling the emotional atmosphere they breathe in. The one who defines the frame defines the power. And in the game of influence, that's all that truly matters. Silence terrifies the insecure because it is not merely the absence of sound. It is the presence of unassailable interiority. It signals a mind that does not need to be heard. When you remain mute after an accusation, a mock, or a deliberate provocation, you do something alchemical. You transform the attacker's certainty into doubt. People crave closure like an animal craves warmth. Ambiguity gnaws at the nervous system. An attacker seeks that neat, satisfying rupture, the defensive outburst, the flustered justification, the stubborn denial, because every reaction hands them emotional currency. But when you refuse to spend that currency, when you let your mouth remain closed and your face unchanged, you starve them of the payoff they engineered. They replay the scene, search for missing clues, and begin to suspect their own judgment. That cognitive loop, the mind circling an unresolved event, is your advantage. Machiavelli understood that silence manipulates perception far more efficiently than any speech. A man who speaks to prove himself exposes the seams of his self-doubt. A man who is silent implies depth, reserves, and a history the other person cannot read. Silence implies economy of force, the suggestion that with one measured sentence you could end the argument, but you choose not to. And that choice is itself a declaration of dominance. Let your quiet say, without melodrama, "I could destroy you with a single sentence, but I won't." More than cruelty, this is strategic restraint. It communicates that you don't bargain for validation because you already possess it. The result is not merely intimidation. It is a reordering of the social ledger. The attacker's energy is spent hunting for confirmation, while your composure accrues respect and fear. In the politics of power, silence is not absence. It is a calibration of presence. Use it as a shield, a blade, and a mirror that forces others to look at themselves. In the void left by your muteness, their certainty dissolves, and your authority quietly hardens. Machiavelli taught that a wise ruler uses enemies more than friends, and once you see insults, rumors, and public attacks as raw material rather than wounds, you stop playing victim and begin to harvest power. When someone levels an accusation, the first rule is simple. Do not explain, observe. Watch who repeats the story, who quiets, who amplifies. Attacks are a live X-ray of your social ecosystem, revealing loyalty, envy, and the weak links you can exploit. Every slur that spreads is attention, and attention, even the negative kind, is a currency you can spend strategically. Let gossip swell, let critics talk. While they busy themselves with narrative construction, you do what they cannot do in the noise. You move, you reorganize alliances, shore up influence, and convert their emotional labor into a stage where your restraint reads as mastery. Use attacks to map influence, identify allies to deepen, rivals to isolate, and spectators to convert into useful conduits. Remember Machiavelli's brutal truth: people forgive slights quicker than they forgive loss of position. So don't exhaust yourself defending an image that is already worn thin. Reinforce your base, create undeniable value, and make the cost of opposing you higher than the cost of staying silent. Your silence is then not passivity, but theater. It forces others to perform their insecurity in public and reveals who looks foolish and who looks steady. Turn the rumor mill into a funnel for your advantage. Let them talk, then act where it matters. Quietly buying influence, strategically aligning with power, and delivering outcomes that silence criticism by consequence rather than argument. In short, transform attack into intelligence, ridicule into reach, and accusation into leverage. When you do, the social currency spent against you becomes the capital you use to consolidate more power. When you stop defending yourself, you do more than withdraw. You reverse the direction of power and become quietly dangerous. Unpredictability in behavior is the seed of domination. People plan around patterns, and when you refuse to follow the expected script, you force them to improvise on your terms. A Machiavellian man understands that emotion is leverage. The person who remains unmoved sets the tempo of every interaction. So by not defending, not reacting, not explaining, you do something far more formidable than silence for its own sake. You study. You watch tone, watch posture, listen for the tremor in their words, and catalog motives and desperation. Anyone who needs your reaction to validate their position is already weak. Deny them that validation and their composure erodes. This is reverse domination. You make them perform. When they accuse, you stay quiet and let them repeat themselves. When they insult, you let the insult sit in the air and watch as they frantically try to press an advantage that no longer exists. In the act of explaining, they leak intent, bias, and emotional investment, the very things you can use to reposition yourself. They begin to over-explain, to apologize, to seek your approval. And in those motions, they reveal their hierarchy. They have moved from aggressor to petitioner. The more they speak, the more obvious their dependence becomes. The less you speak, the larger the shadow of your competence grows. That dynamic is a trade. They're words for your territory. Let them give you the information. Let them squander their credibility. You keep the calm and convert their noise into advantage. Reverse domination is surgical, not theatrical. It requires patience, observation, and the art of gentle pressure. You do not humiliate for sport. You create conditions where the attacker humiliate themselves by revealing too much. You then act quietly on the intelligence they offered. Isolate their allies, reward your true supporters, and make moves so inevitable that criticism becomes costly. In short, by refusing to engage you, invert the power flow. You make others explain, you make others chase, and you let their emotional labor fund your ascent. The less you wrangle for truth, the more others reveal it for you. The less you argue, the more you are seen as the arbiter of consequence. That is the subtle, clinical mastery of reverse domination. Win without shouting, conquer by withholding, and let the world fill the silence with your victory. Machiavelli's fascination with power was never theoretical. It was born from watching men who embodied it. His admiration for Cesare Borgia came from observing how effortlessly Borgia used perception as armor. When accused of murder, Borgia did not defend, deny, or explain. He simply smiled, changed the subject, and continued ruling as if the accusation were beneath his notice. That small refusal to justify himself transformed gossip into myth. People feared him, respected him, and whispered about him, but they never touched him. The uncertainty surrounding his guilt became part of his aura, a fog that made him unpredictable and therefore untouchable. Machiavelli understood that the strongest rulers were not those who seemed pure, but those who appeared impossible to read. Borgia's silence became a mirror in which others projected their own fears, making him larger than life and impossible to fully understand. Centuries later, the same pattern plays out in modern power structures. The corporate titan facing scandal who vanishes for a week and returns with results instead of excuses. The politician who absorbs attacks, offers no defense, and lets the storm exhaust itself. The cultural figure who responds to public criticism not with statements, but with achievement. These are modern incarnations of the same principle. They understand that explanation dilutes mystique, and mystique is a kind of protection. The crowd moves on when there is no drama to feed on, but they remember the calm figure who never flinched. That's why the powerful often appear serene when the weak would panic. Their calm is not apathy, it's strategy. It communicates without words. Your accusations are too small to touch me. It projects a psychological altitude that others cannot reach. This composure disorients attackers and reassures followers, creating an aura of inevitability that words could never achieve. In every era, from Renaissance courts to modern boardrooms, the same law holds true. Those who master silence rule perception, and those who rule perception rule people. If you want Machiavelli's technique to live in your bones, stop treating reputation like a thing you defend and start treating it like infrastructure you build. When someone questions your character, Resist the itch to launch a rebuttal. Words are fleeting, actions accumulate. Instead of proving innocence, make the accusation look small by living deliberately. Deliver results, keep appointments, protect your standards, and let time make the critic appear petty. Time is the quiet advocate of power. While they shout, you compound credibility through motion. Use silence as a calibrated weapon. Learn to tolerate pauses, to let awkwardness sit in the air, to allow a pause after a provocation that forces the other person to either escalate themselves or embarrassingly repeat their claim. Every empty second you hold is psychological pressure you did not have to manufacture with argument. Observe before you react. Treat every attack like raw intelligence. Ask yourself, silently and quickly, what does this person gain if I respond? Who benefits from my reaction? When you decode motive, the supposed urgency of the attack evaporates. Act while they argue. Let them spend their energy on narrative. You spend yours on execution. Quiet progress is the most cutting defense. Results render rumor impotent. Finally, project calm dominance as a daily discipline. Keep your posture steady, your gaze even, your voice measured. These small, repeatable physical choices broadcast a mind that is not easily moved. Practice them in low-stakes moments, on the phone, in meetings with friends, so they become automatic when stakes climb. Do not confuse cruelty with strategy. This method is clinical, not petty. You withhold reaction to gather truth, to conserve power, and to convert other people's emotional labor into your strategic advantage. Over time, practiced indifference becomes a signature. People stop expecting you to defend, they begin to accommodate you, and the world starts to move around the space you quietly create. Machiavelli understood an uncomfortable truth about the world, that truth itself is powerless without control. In life, perception rules reality, and you cannot control perception if you're forever trapped reacting to it. The moment you start defending yourself, you hand others the authority to define what is real. You enter their frame, speak their language, and fight battles they designed for you to lose. A man who constantly explains himself slowly becomes a man who lives inside other people's minds. He starts measuring his worth by their approval, his choices by their comfort, and his identity by their validation. But the man who does not defend, who acts, who moves, who lets silence be his answer, that man becomes something different. He becomes unreadable. He becomes unpredictable. He becomes a mystery. And in the hierarchy of human psychology, mystery always outranks explanation. Never justify, never explain, never beg to be understood. Those who truly matter will read your actions, not your words. Those who demand explanations do so because they need leverage. And the moment you give them words, they weaponize them. Power lies in restraint. It lies in your ability to let the world misunderstand you without flinching. Because the moment you stop defending yourself, you stop playing the game by their rules. And that is when true authority begins. You build your own frame, your own rhythm, your own gravitational field that pulls others in without effort. Understand this. Power is rarely loud. It doesn't shout, argue, or plead. It sits still and lets everything orbit around it. To overturn power quickly, you don't argue harder. You grow calmer. You don't defend your name. You build a legacy that makes argument unnecessary. This is the Machiavellian paradox. Real control is invisible, and real dominance comes not from aggression, but from unshakable composure. So when someone accuses you, mocks you, or tries to drag you into their emotional chaos, do not react. Do not justify. Do not explain. Simply observe. Smile faintly, and let silence do what it always does best. Destroy their certainty, expose their insecurity, and remind them that power does not defend itself. It never needs to. That is the final lesson. Control perception by mastering yourself. Because when nothing outside you can disturb your calm, you no longer chase power, you become it.